Good morning, respected professors, seniors, and my dear friends. A very warm welcome to all of you. I am Rehana Sultana, a student of World Literature. I am delighted to be your host for today's session. We are gathered here for an enriching discussion on contemporary Indian literary theory, a field that continues to grow, challenge, and receive global critical thought. It is my great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Balaji Ranganathan. Professor Balaji Ranganathan is the chairperson of the Center for Comparative Literature and Translation Studies at the Central University of Gujarat. His area of specialization are comparative literature and Asian studies, Orientalism, India and political discourse, psychoanalysis, archaeology and ancient India, Indian bronze, sculptural studies, and ancient Indian numismatics. Today, we are privileged to hear from him and gain fresh insights into the evolving landscape of literary theory in India. Without further delay, I invite Professor Balaji Ranganathan to begin today's session.
Thank you so much, Rihanna. Uh, I'm audible at home. Yes.
Yes.
And a big thanks to Professor Mishra for giving me an opportunity and to Nalanda University for inviting me here for a talk. And when Professor Mishra suggested that we needed something within Indian literary studies, especially contemporary literary studies within India, I thought that was extremely interesting, uh, primarily because of a large number of reasons as to why a number of them haven't been looked at in a very close way, or they might not be a part of your larger mainstream understanding of what is contemporary literary understanding today. Yes? And in a way, it helps us to get back to a state of focus where we start focusing on a large number. In the sense, we are not in the process of negation, nor are we in the process of accepting things, but we would like to understand uh, views across the board. We like to understand how there might be an understanding of some kind that can be posited to help us negotiate time periods. Because as I said, the world is in a constant state of change, and change is the essence of everything. Yes. So in the process of change, one would need to revisit certain aspects of the past in a way to have a better understanding of the present, and that helps us to move forward a bit. So, what I'll be doing for the next 3 days is a series of talks. In the sense, today I'll be beginning with Aurobindo Ghosh. Actually, he's known as Sri Aurobindo today. So we're going to understand Sri Aurobindo's discourse because he is a multifaceted individual, right? Multifaceted in the sense you have him as a poet, critical, revolutionary, a freedom fighter. He's been an administrator, an educator, and is also in a way he metamorphosized as a spiritual guru also at the end of his larger career. But what we also need to understand is one salient aspect within Indian literary writing, which is ignored with Sri Aurobindo. We normally think about the epic, don't we? It's just an introduction before I begin my slides. We normally understand epics, don't we? So we normally ask students who are within world literatures would understand the epical tradition within Greek or Roman, or they might at the most go back to British literature or English literature, and they'll end up with John Milton's Paradise Lost, and they feel that the epical tradition ended there. But this is something as students you need to know that Sri Aurobindo continued the epical tradition. He continued that with a massive epic on Savitri, a figure with the Indian Puranas. And this is something that's not looked at much. The idea of Savitri as an epic, and how does it actually grow on it. But keeping this brief idea of Aurobindo in mind as a multifaceted personality, right? As a multifaceted personality, probably very few Indian thinkers would move the range as Aurobindo did, right? But let me get down to my slides so that we don't waste time, Professor Mishra. Just to introduce Aurobindo to people. Okay, Aurobindo. Yes. Is this visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. So the talk that I'm going to give today is is on his critique of the Renaissance in India. Yes. Oh, okay. But it's a fundamental critique. A fundamental critique of the Renaissance, of the so-called Renaissance in India, because it's a debated, it's a contested idea that happened between the 18th and the 20th centuries, 18th and the 19th centuries, 200 years, in early years of the 20th century also. So today, what I'll be doing is I'm going bang into the 19th century to try and understand Aurobindo's critique of the Bengal Renaissance, and the Bengal Renaissance actually spread out across India to some extent. Tomorrow, what I will be doing when I'll be talking about a future vision of India, a possible vision, or the rebirth of India, because he has a text by that name, is where I'll be engaging with post-colonialism to some extent, and I'll be looking at Sri Aurobindo in a comparative way with Gandhi also, because Aurobindo had a massive critique of Gandhi and policies also. So I'll be doing that for the next 2 days, and day after tomorrow, I'll be talking about a very different matter, right? Where I'll be talking about the idea of Deshivad or nativism with Balachandra Devani. But let's begin with Aurobindo, the critique of the Renaissance. Now we are all very clear with this idea of what we understand as a Renaissance. It was first, of course, has been used within late medieval Europe, mid and late medieval Europe, where we're talking about the Italian Renaissance. We're talking about humanism, the humanistic translation of texts, ideas. We're talking about scientific advances. We're talking about discoveries. We're talking about a number of things that happened in Europe at that particular moment in time. Largely, when we talk about the Renaissance, we're also talking about this encounter that Europe had with West Asia, the Ottoman Empire. We are going to talk about this huge transfer, if you can put it that way, a cultural transfer, a transfer within scientific ideas, a transfer within literary concepts, texts, political discourses, and so on and so forth. So when we say the Renaissance, it's West Asia, Europe together. Yeah, and we are also talking about this idea of the emergence of Europe, what, we, what can be termed, what was termed as the Dark Ages. So, from the Dark Ages, what we talk about it in terms of the upper medieval, you're moving to a state of rediscovery. Whether it's Galileo, whether it's Copernicus, you're talking about the exploration of human forms, whether it's Da Vinci or Michelangelo, Raphael, number of painters of that particular period, talking about advances in architecture, we're talking about advances in technology, a technological advance. So that's what they meant by the Renaissance, a period of reawakening. Yeah. So something like this, they say, happened in Bengal. What is what is understood within modern Indian history as the Bengal Renaissance. Well, we know Bengal specifically was an early province that within India that was in a way a hub for the British East India Company that came in. So you have Moslimapatnam, you have Madras, which is the earliest. You understand it's Fort St. George, and then you have this advance towards Bengal, specifically after the Black Hole of Kolkata event that happened. You have a very important battle that took place, what's known as the Battle of Plassey in 1857. Plassey or Palushi. Palushi is that village in Bengal where it happened. This particular history is very well known. So they win that Battle of Plassey, and you have the first Divani of Bengal that comes in, and you have the establishment, what you understand as the early courts in Bengal, the first Supreme Court of India at that time, colonial India, at that time, you have administrative reforms, you have revenue reforms, and you have educational reforms that happen. Yes. So when we say, when we talk about the Bengal Renaissance, we're talking about it in terms of cultural terms, we're talking about it in terms of an intellectual explosion of some kind. At the same time, we're talking about this idea of social revivalism. Yes? And this largely happens because of what we understand as British education or this new education that comes in within Bengal at that particular moment. So you have the establishment of certain institutions that come in, whether it is the famous Presidency College, the Hindu College in Kolkata, you have the Sanskrit College in Banaras that comes in Varanasi today, right? You have the Delhi College that comes up in Delhi, which is an older madrasa that was established during the Mughal rule. Uh, Today, of course, it's a part of Zakir Hussain College. Anyway, so you have a huge amount of educational reform that's going to happen. The educational reform that we understand also happens through a large scale printing of textbooks that come in. So this is crucially important, isn't it? Because when you say print culture is absolutely important. Like what you had at Gutenberg in Europe, with the invention of the printing press, largely, in a sense, there was this larger accessibility to ideas that came in with the idea of the printing press and printed books. Same thing happened here. This is the printing press, the first Bengali type that came in with Nathaniel Hallhead, Charles Wilkins, people who were working on the idea of a printing press. You have the Sri Rampur missionaries, the Serampur missionaries that who actually established the Serampur press. And you have a very famous college there, even today, the Serampur College that was established by the Indian Baptist Society of that particular period. So you have three major figures there, whether it's William Carey, Joshua Marshman and William Ward, three missionaries at Sri Rampur who are engaged within a larger amount of translation of texts and so on and so forth. And they're translating, they are compiling lexicons, dictionaries from various languages, Indian languages, largely, remember, because I mean, these are Baptist missions, these are Christian missionaries who have come in, and they've been waiting for a very long time. Remember, because until 1813, the Charter Act, the British East India Company did not allow uh, missionary activity within their Indian controls. It's only after 1813 that the Baptist missionaries are allowed in, and the process of education begins. So you have establishments of schools, you have uh, establishments where textbooks are printed. Those who are interested could look up the early records of Fort St. William in Calcutta, where you have these early textbooks that have come up. Sri Rampur archive is also there. Those who want to look it up. But this early education that came had a had a massive emphasis on what we understand as to find a better word, secular education, let us say. So it was largely sciences, early sciences, advances in sciences, mathematics. Now these were the subjects that were being taught what people understand as a new form of bringing in an intellectual change within school education as well as college education. And this also meant, and remember, these schools, which were largely meant for Anglo-Indian children, right? Children who came in from mixed marriages that happened in early colonialism. So they were actually meant for them. And gradually they opened out for the local public. And you had the elite of Calcutta at that time who were studying in these schools. And remember, it brings about a huge change within worldviews. Yes. So if you're talking about early schooling at that particular period, what could be understood as the tolls, TOLS, the tolls of Calcutta, tolls would be small, small schools which are not very formalized, yes, but there's an education of some kind happening there, and that has been the traditional mode of education within India. So the tolls of Calcutta of that particular period, they transformed. There was a huge transformation that happened. Now this brought about a huge change within it. So you had a whole group of people, young students, who in a way were trained within this larger European context of education. So they were exposed to a huge number of things, whether you're talking about European philosophy, European poetry, European languages, at the same time, the European sciences. So there's an entire change in the worldview that's happening at that particular moment, and that is leading to an obvious reaction. The obvious reaction is that you reject the older forms of knowledge, or what we understand as intellectual transfer. Yeah, so you're rejecting an entire earlier system of educational ideas that are in, and you're bringing in a brand new concept. Yes, at the same time, if you look at that third point on that slide where I talk about significance, and I'm talking about India's broader Renaissance and independence movement, where I put a question mark there. It's right here. So there's a question mark there, and Aurobindo is going to make it a question, right? A lot of what you understand as post-colonial studies today has made it a question as to how do we call it a renaissance for that, right? Opinion is divided on this, but let's see what Aurobindo has to say. I think we talked about this. Yes, am I talking about the third point here?
Sir, can you please make the slide full by putting F5?
Of
Because
course, of
then
course, of course. I'll do that. Is it a bit, is it visible now?
it is visible, but you have the whole screen becoming visible. Only slide if we can see. Then it will be bigger and better.
Have I done it? I've done that here. Is it visible there? No.
No, it is not visible here.
Okay, let me check out. Let me check out.
And hello, sir. This is
Yeah.
Aman.
Yeah.
Sir, sorry for disturbance. Sir, voice is also, sir, not very clear, sir.
It's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just decrease the fan of it. Let me see if I can just make this bigger. Oh dear. Okay, on a slideshow. If I do it now, is it visible, sir?
Not yet, sir.
Oh dear.
Maybe you can stop sharing and share again, perhaps.
Okay.
Window.
Okay. I'll do that. One moment, sir. Oh, it's still small. And now?
No, sir. It is the same that has come again.
Oh dear. Is there a way we can do this? One moment.
Was
How do we do this now? What? One moment. I think what I'll do is how do we make this big? I've forgotten how to make it big now. This is a slideshow. This is on. So it's not happening.
okay. Then no problem, sir. Then let us continue. Let's continue.
As long as I'm visible. Yes.
Because the same has come again, so no problem, sir. Let us continue, sir.
One moment. So
Some
let me see.
technical glitch might be there. Let us continue.
Yeah. So where was I? Yes. Yes. So I had stopped somewhere around Western education, and it challenged a lot of things. In the sense we are talking about, it challenged this entire idea of caste. I'm not too sure if many of you understand what caste is as a sociological category within India. So it questioned caste rigidity. It questioned sati. Remember, it questioned the idea of child marriage. A number of things. These are the social problems, and these are political problems also. So these are socio-political problems in that particular age, where you're having a major encounter with this, with these ideas. Sati, of course, was banished, was annulled by the Governor General then, whose name was William Bentinck, and there was this major reformer who had come in, whose name is Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I'm sure you are aware of it. there were a number of social organizations that came in, whether it's the Brahmo Samaj of that period. You had a gentleman called Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar who actually uh, laid, he had undertaken a campaign on the idea of widow remarriage. You had a thinker called Keshav Chandra Sen who continued Brahmo reforms in a big way. So, what you're seeing during this period is a, a massive intervention by the local Bengali intelligentsia of the period. I mean, they're all comparatively well off, remember, right? Most of them are zamindars, yes. They own a lot of land, and they are making a huge intervention into into uh, what we understand as a renaissance for the Bengal Renaissance today. Somewhere I had written on Raja Rammohn Roy, yes, a very interesting figure, let me tell you, because because he's done, I mean, a key figure because he's done a number of things. One is he campaigned against sati in a big way, all right? Or what you understand as sati would be the wife burning herself on her husband's fire after the husband's death. It's an old system which continued in the early years of the 19th and the 20th century, early 19th century. And this was seen at odds with what you understand as European modernity, because that didn't happen everywhere. Yes? And Raja Rammohn Roy had campaigned against it in a big way until its abolition by Lord William Bentinck, who was the Governor General there. In the same way, he had also opened what you understand as a Sanskrit school in Kolkata. All right, a Sanskrit toll where Sanskrit education was taught. At the same time, he's also writing a letter to the Governor General who came after. His name was Lord Amherst. He's writing a letter where he's asking for English education and reforms within English education. So it's extremely difficult. Remember, this particular period, when you're talking about the Renaissance in India, it's extremely difficult to pinpoint people within a singular position, right? So that's one mistake people should avoid as far as possible. In the sense, it's very very difficult to pinpoint and say yes, the person is in the X category, or the person is represents the Y category, or the person represents the Z category. Categories are blurred at this particular period. So a lot of them are for the reformers are within the traditional set, right? The traditional idea of what India has to be, and so on and so forth. At the same time, they are also bringing in a huge impetus on what we understand as reform. And what you understand as a renaissance is this amalgamation, an amalgamation between what you understand as tradition on one hand and the idea of reform on the other. And it's not a very peaceful coexistence. It's not a very peaceful coexistence because, as I said, reform of any kind always has responses. Yes, but overall, what you saw was a huge growth with what you understand as literature, or you understand as art, and so on and so forth, because you had a huge outpouring in a way of experimental writing that happened. All right, so you had I mean you could just see the names. I mean, you had people like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who actually writes the first Indian novel in English. It's called Rajmohan's Wife. Yes, but then he is writing in Bangla continuously. At the same time, remember, he's writing a novel like Anand Mat, novels like Durgesh Nandini, and so on and so forth. I mean, which are questioning the very premise of what you understand as this new received tradition that's coming in from Europe. right? He's questioning all that. But at the same time, he is associated as a legal judge. If you can, I won't use the term judge, but let's say he was associated with the legal affairs of the British East India Company there. Tagore we know, right? A huge personality, Tagore, a Nobel laureate. But the third person, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, is a very interesting person who comes in. Because like Aurobindo, Dutt is also educated in England, right? He receives his formal schooling within England, comes to India, begins writing in a received tradition. So much of your early 19th century writing that's happening within English would be hugely influenced by the British Romantic poets. Whether it's Keats or Shelley, Byron, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So this English Romanticism is something that you see uh, within the early writings of people like that, or people like Henry Vivian Delosio, or the Dutt sisters, Toru Dutt, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But at the same time, remember, though they are extremely proficient with English as a language, whether it's Dutt, whether it's Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, or whether it's Aurobindo, all right? Aurobindo, of course, continues with English in a major way, but they are all questioning the entire premise of what you understand as language. Bankim Chandra, after Rajmohan's wife, will shift to Bangla as a major language for his writings. Michael Madhusudan Dutt is more famous for a Bangla poem. It's called Meghnad Bhat Kavya, the death of Meghnad, right? It's one of the tellings and the retellings that you have within the Ramayana that's happening. But they're writing in Bangla, right? So this questioning, so remember, this questioning of what we are understanding as the Renaissance that happened, right? Somewhere at the cost of a lot of what you already had within India in terms of European modernity is something that people are questioning. And and Aurobindo is going to build up on that. He's going to build up on that in a very specific way. Because there are very few critiques on the Renaissance, let me tell you, the Bengal Renaissance, in terms of a conceptual understanding, in terms of a framework within which you could contest. Yes? What Bankim Chandra did was he shifted his creative base into Bangla. Michael Madhusudan Dutt shifts his creative base into Bangla. Tagore writes in Bangla, translates into English. Right? Gitanjali is basically a translation of the Bangla Gitanjali. Yes, they're doing that. But very few actually brought in a critique, because even Gandhi doesn't do that in the Hind Swaraj. But Aurobindo is going to go right to the root of the problem. He's going to talk about this early encounter, the Bengal Renaissance as an early encounter and a decisive encounter, which leads to forms of amnesia, cultural amnesia that's happening. Right? So we won't say we forget, we do remember, but there's an amnesia. There's a lovely book written on that. There's an amnesia of sorts of what had happened, or what was there prior to European colonialism within South Asia. I won't limit just to India. Remember, South Asia, because what you understood as Indian policy actually moved across. So you had a massive rise in literature with the rise of Bengali novels, poetry, nationalistic writings that happened. You had a huge influence within art, right? So you had, after the company school of art that was there, you had the Mughal school of art, then you had the company school of art, then you had a very, very different interpretation of reality what you understand as the Bengal School of Art today that began with Rabindranath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore's brother. At the same time, you had theatre as a major space where things are happening. So you had a major figure there, Girish Chandra Ghosh, and Girish Ghosh, in a way, is going to bring back your Indian epical traditions, whether it's the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or episodes within the Puranas, onto the Bengali stage. And this is that period, remember, where you have Girish Ghosh operating here. You have Bankim Chandra writing. You have Vivekananda also about to make his massive entry into America, all right, with the Chicago addresses, right? And in Bombay presidency, on the other side of India, the west of India, you have the early growth of silent cinema within India. All right. So we don't look at this in individual terms. So you're seeing a massive change that is happening not only within Bombay presidency. So you have the early growth of silent cinema that's coming up with Raja Harishchandra. That comes a bit later, yes, but the influences are on. You have a massive change that's happening in Kolkata, and you have a massive change that's happening in the south with Madras or Fort St. George. So things are changing here. A number of reforms that happened: the abolition of sati, 1829. You had the Widow Remarriage Act that happened in 1856. Special colleges and schools for women. At the same time, the spread of Western sciences. But remember, Indian knowledge systems are not going away at this particular period because there was this huge emphasis on Sanskrit studies also happening. All right. Okay. So a great deal of nationalism and political awakening that's happening. So you have the Bengal Renaissance and nationalism, early nationalism that's coming up. Uh, for people who would like to see this, an early growth of internationalism would be advised to read a bit on Vivekananda to some extent. Though nationalism might not be so overt with Vivekananda, it's still too early for in that period. But you definitely find it within Bankim Chandra, right? As to how it's coming up. It also brought in, remember, a wave of liberalism that happened within the empire. So we don't understand colonialism as a one-way street, remember, or all white men or all colonialists within a one-way street. There were a large number of people who also critiqued colonialism within Europe at this period. So you had the formation of the Indian National Congress, and this happens with a British collector. His name was Hugh, all right? And Hugh and Wilberforce, they are able to bring about the formation of a political front within India. And this is the formation of the Indian National Congress. And then you have, by 1905, the beginnings of the Swadeshi, right? So the period I'm talking about spans nearly 150 odd years. Yes, what we understand as the Renaissance in India. So the Swadeshi movement comes up in 1905, and you have the early people who are working here. Whether it's Gokhale, you have Lokmanya Tilak, you have so Feroz Shah Mehta, Dadobhai Nauroji, a number of thinkers, and mostly remember, these thoughts are coming in from Bombay presidency, from Bombay, because Bombay at that time it still is the economic capital of India in a larger sense. Huge amount of economics happening there. So this is where it grows, specifically with the intervention of the Parsis in Bombay. At the same time, at the same time, a lot of Maharashtrians who are living in Bombay are also joining this The idea of Swadeshi, it's picking up, though it's still very nascent. Remember, it's 1905, still very nascent. We are not even talking about provincial governments right now. We are not talking about seat sharing agreements that happened within the provincial governments in India at that time. No, but what we are seeing is a growth within this idea that that we might have got a large number of things via what we understand as the European intervention, but at the same time we are missing out on a lot of things. All right, what we understand as the Swadeshi or something that belonged to you. All right, it's about to grow, and this you will see will be picked up by people like Tilak. It will be picked up by Gandhi. It will be picked up by Sri Aurobindo in a big way. All right, and all three, remember, will be functioning on different platforms of thought, actually. All right, so Gandhi's ideas will not be echoed by Sri Aurobindo, all right, and Tilak's ideas might not be echoed by a large number of uh, thinkers who come in with the Swadeshi, right? So you would have you would have a political opinion veering in a broad way here, from a very extreme point of view to what we understand as a very moderate point of view. I won't use the term extremists and moderates, but let us say it is the entire stream of opinion will be massive. Yes. So we're talking about a large number of. I'll come to this later. There's no point here. I'll talk about this. Okay. This particular slide where you're talking about post-colonial studies, cultural identity, and Aurobindo, I'll be taking the talk tomorrow. But let's focus on the Aurobindo now, where we're talking about two books. In 1918, James H. Cousin had a book called The Renaissance in India, right? And Aurobindo, he makes a response to this book, and this comes out in 1920. Still very early, remember, very early when we're talking about nationalistic movements, we're talking about nationalistic ideas still in a state of formation. You're having Sri Aurobindo talking about this or challenging the basic premise of what you understand as the Renaissance, right? And what does mm, yes, what does he talk about? Aurobindo talks about in his core argument, he's talking about the Indian Renaissance as I'll be talking about this in detail ahead, but just to bring you the core ideas. So he's going to talk about the Indian Renaissance as a spiritual reawakening. That's going to be a major point with Aurobindo. Second point that he would make is you need to understand and search for India within the ancient spiritual ideas of what we understand as India. And third thing he talks about is we need to go a bit beyond the idea of revival. Okay? And we need to find what he mentioned as new forms of what you understand as eternal truths. Right. I'll just mention two things here because I thought I'll be talking a bit about this tomorrow, but let me introduce it. When we talk about nation states, we understand nation states as a very modern idea. It's, it comes out of out of the Westphalian notion. So what you understand as a nation state is very recent, very European in context, where we're talking about it in terms of single communities, single language identities. Yeah. Now, that might be good enough for Europe, but it'd be a very difficult idea if you're trying to bring about this idea of a nation state forms within Asia, right? Mainly because the idea and the nature of diversity within Asia is huge. You would have any number of religions, any number of communities, any number of belief systems within within the modern nation states of Asia. It would be very, very difficult to bring about a centralized notion of what we understand as a modern nation state in European terms. Right? Secondly, what you understand as a nation state, we are actually talking about countries that were recently formed, say 250, 300 years old, right? Because what the Westphalian Treaty did was it recognized the idea of sovereignty in a big way, sovereignty of a nation, and that becomes a centralized idea within what we understand as modern geopolitics today, the idea of sovereignty of a nation state. But good enough for new nation states. Now, what do we do with old nation states, or what we understand as civilizational states, right? And we have a huge number of civilizational states within the world, right? So we talk about Latin America. Many of them are civilizational. They have uh, they have their ancient cultures. There's Aztecs, Toltecs, Mystics, goes back 1,000 years. Egypt goes back 4,000, 5,000 years. India goes back 8 to 10,000 years. China goes back 4 to 5,000 years. Right? These are old civilizational states. Very, very difficult for them to understand and bring in a modern concept of a nation state in, because these states, I'll talk about this in greater detail tomorrow, but civilizational states in a way are are rooted within their long histories. They're rooted within the idea of change. They're rooted within the idea of disappearance. They're rooted within the idea of revival. Number of things. So it's as if these states are matured beyond a point, right? They have seen within their long histories periods where periods which are massively beautiful, periods which are massively dark. At the same time, they are able, the nation state is able to come out of the binaries and the problems of these binaries. India is one of them, right? So, Aurobindo's idea is this, and India has been able to survive its long history, and it's been a turbulent history. Periods of periods of huge achievements and dark periods too. Yes. So it's been able to achieve it only because of a larger spiritual understanding of what we understand as the past. We understand that in terms of the self. We understand that in terms of society, right? It's a spiritual understanding of what we're doing, and he's going to argue this out because this is what was missing within Cousin's argument. Because when Cousin is about to make his core argument, he looks at it only in two terms. He sees it as a cultural idea. He talks about it in terms of an intellectual revival, right? He's talking about it in terms of a Western contact. He's talking about it in terms of a modern education, all right? So all this happened. It's not that it didn't happen. So we have what Cousin is arguing within the Bengal Renaissance is absolutely clear. All right, there was a cultural change, a massive cultural change. We had a whole generation of students in 18th century Bengal, in early 19th century Bengal, who in a way turned away from uh, the larger cultural heritage of India. Yeah, there was an intellectual revival, interestingly. Yes, I mean, you had new forms of studies that came into India. Studies within the sciences, as I told you, studies within mathematics, as I said, number of things came, and it changed the very attitudes of people, very attitudes of people. But it also led to a decline, in a way, of, of the root cultures of colonized nations. That's what modernity and colonialism does. What it does is it will suppress the older cultural forms and the older intellectual ideas that came out within this. Let me give you an example. You had this very famous college that was established after the British East India Company conquered Delhi. Yeah, they took over Delhi and they established the Delhi College. And remember, Delhi in the 19th century was a vibrant place, specifically in terms of Urdu literature, in terms of poetry, in terms of intellectual content of that particular period, massively beautiful. So you had Mirza Ghalib, a very, very famous Persian poet, a very famous Urdu poet also, probably the most important poet in the 19th century in India. Yeah, and you had a college that was established, and there was an old madrasa that was functioning there. That was the Ghiasuddin Madrasa, and that's where the college began. And it changed the entire context and the, the cultural capital of Delhi in a big way. This new education that came in, there was a lot of excitement. People were hugely excited. So, and they were and they, specifically with the sciences that was coming in, the new sciences that were coming in. Ghalib writes on this. At the same time, he's also talking about how a large part of what you understand as the Western philosophical thought, whether it's Plato or Aristotle, is being taught in a big way within this madrasa. Interestingly, Plato is understood as Aflatun in the Arabic tradition. All right. So this Western contact and modern education, in a way, Cousin's argument, though he doesn't make it in a very explicit way. So remember, Cousins, when he's writing in this book, he's not talking about it in racial terms because racialism was a major context of this period. What you understand as eugenics or racial typology, racial eugenic research that was on, it happened across Europe in the 19th century, where the larger idea was that you had to bring about a medical intervention into understanding the difference between the colonized and the colonizer, right? So they would talk about it in terms of brain cubic capacities. They would talk about it in terms of the evolution of man, in a way. So the colonized, in that sense, were not seen as the Homo sapiens sapiens. You know, who, who would be representative of the major evolutionary point in that sense. Yes. So what you understand is racial eugenics is not within Cousins' argument. Cousins is making this argument in a different way. He's talking about it in cultural terms. He's talking about it in terms of an intellectual revival. And he's saying that as a civilized colonialism, as a civilizing mission. Yes, colonialism as a civilizing mission was something that uh, changed the very cultural fabric of India. And it only happened because of this Western contact and modern education. Right? And he's going to talk about Cousins talks about Tagore, he talks about the Bengal School of Art, and so on and so forth, to bring about this idea that this Renaissance, and remember, what Cousins is doing is bringing a European context and he's superimposing that within the larger Indian context. So the European Renaissance, because Renaissance happened across Europe. The Italian Renaissance is only one of the Renaissance. All right. So you had the French Renaissance, you had the Bavarian one, you had the Italian one, number of places you had it. Denmark had it in a major way. The Flemish school, as I said. So he brings and superimposes an idea from Europe onto India. That's what he does. And he says it is modern education and this Western contact that is doing that, focusing on that. And Aurobindo, in a way, is going to contest this idea. He's going to contest the very premise that was there a renaissance in any sense. What did it do? All right, let's have a look. Yes. Like, for example, what does Cousins talk about in terms of European ethnology? What he does is he talks about he's comparing India's revival to the European Renaissance. Right? I've talked about that. Then he says there's a rediscovery of your classical Indian heritage. So this is a huge problem, right? A huge problem. Now let's understand this in terms of what exactly happened and, and how does colonialism come in within this larger reinterpretation of classical India. I gave you an understanding that India is a civilizational state. It cannot be termed as a modern nation state in today's terms. Right? A lot of many countries within Asia would fall within civilizational states. I mean, they have old civilizations, right? That have existed for the last 8 to 10,000 years, and they have seen a large number of changes in this, right? Dark periods, bright periods, intense growth that happened, right? Intense growth in terms of architecture, in terms of writing, in terms of painting. Number of things happen. Governance, number of things happen. At the same time, you're seeing periods of lull also, right? So when you have long histories, it's very difficult to focus on a particular period, no? Very, very difficult to focus on a particular period. Example, let us say, let me just give an example. If I talk about the United States of America, if you're talking about the history of the United States of America, it's a very young history. We have, uh, I'm not sure if within American literature, students are actually taught the native cultures that existed prior to American colonialism. I'm not sure if anybody is taught within American studies as to how you saw a dissipation of your Native American cultures happening. So when we talk about American cultural history or American history, it would largely begin with the Civil War. It might begin with an event like the Boston Tea Party, where it might begin with the Declaration of Independence, and then you have the classic Federalist Papers that comes in, whether it's Hamilton or magazine, the early Benjamin Franklin, the early founders of the American Constitution. It's very, very difficult uh, for the Americans to get back beyond. Beyond is slightly difficult for them also. Yeah, because what you be seeing with the early American frontier would be a destruction of native cultures that's happening. So that's not seen within the American histories at all when it stopped. People are happy talking about emancipation, modern ideas, right? You're talking about the American Civil War, you're talking about slave trade, you're talking about the classic ideas of democracy that are coming in. Right? You're talking about the French Revolution, you're talking about Rousseau, number of things. But you'll not go back early because it's very difficult for Europe vis-a-vis America to go back into the past. Very, very difficult. Because the earliest forms of what you understand as European history would be West Asian history. It would be within West Asia, places like Syria, places like Turkey, right? Now, these are the earliest sites of what you understand as civilization that's happening that had contact with Europe, right? Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, sites like Petra, the early encounter with the Persian civilization that happened, all right? So it's basically West Asia and Asia. Now, when you come to countries like India, come to countries like China, then it becomes very, very difficult because, as I said, the time periods are huge, right? Now, within those long time periods, you have huge amount of change that is happening, a lot of choice that is happening with people, and a lot of things that people are temporarily leaving also, right? In what you understand as tradition. So you have a huge number of philosophical systems within India, 7 of them. Huge number of writing that happened in early India in Sanskrit, in different Prakrits. They talk about Ardhamagadi in Jainism, or you're talking about Pali in Buddhism. A lot of writing that happened very, very early. A lot of rulers, a lot of kingdoms that came, established, built, and disappeared. Because as I said, it's not a small history. We're talking about a long, long period of over 2,500 years, 2,500 years to 3,000 years. If we're talking about a historical India, if I go into proto history, in the Indian history would go back another 5,000 years. So we're talking about 10,000 years of development that's happening, right? Whether we talk right from the early civilizations that happened in Harappa, that's happened on the Saraswati civilization, what you understand the Hakra and the Gagar, then it's coming to your classical period with the Guptas. It's a long period. So many people, so in a sense, what you understand as a nature of time within India has never been the linear quality. Remember, has never been the linear quality. Time has always been seen as a cyclic idea. Linearity in terms of time is a very modern idea. So it was seen as a cyclic idea that came in, and the idea of emergence, maturity, that is a constant, is a constant always. So you have kingdoms come, you have traditions that will come, you'll have religions that will come. All the three will grow to a certain point, and then the decay happens, and something new replaces it. All right. So what you understand as memory within India is not rooted within a specific time period. It's never been. Memory, because it's a long history, can go forwards and backwards across thinkers in India, right? So you have 19th century literary commentators in a Tika tradition within India who would be commenting on thinkers who were operating around 300 BC, a space of nearly 800 to 900 years. Now you will understand what I mean by the cyclic idea of time. It's never been linear. So you're able to go back, you're able to retrieve, you're able to push aside, mainly because it's a very long history. Huge number of things have happened. So every thinker across time within India has focused on what he or she feels is representatively important at a particular moment in time. Yes? So not everything is remembered, as I said. Cultural memory is a selective idea, right? So the cultural memory in the 19th century cannot be compared to a cultural memory in the 4th century or in the 12th century or the 16th century. Cultural memories will function in different ways across time. Today's cultural memory is not the same as the cultural memory of the 19th century. Yes? So the idea of the present constantly operates, and this is what Cousins was talking about when he said the Renaissance, in a way, brought back certain aspects of India's past. And this was brought back via an entire scheme of translations that happened within India. So, in their pursuit of governance, in their pursuit of uh, trying to build up an idea of jurisprudence or law within India, the British East India Company soon realized that they cannot administer English civil law early. I'm talking about early colonialism, right? They could not administer English civil law within India. Mainly because the law that was followed is a very different law. So the Hindus have a different law, the Muslims have a different law, right? Laws were different. So if the Hindus were following the Smriti tradition, the Muslims are following the Hanafi tradition. Yeah. So the laws are very different. So in a way to understand the nature of the law, what you had was a massive translation project that happened within colonial India to understand the Indian scheme of things. So they translated your major texts of Indian law, what they constituted as law. Whether it's the Manusmriti, the Katyayana Smriti, the Bodhyana Smriti, the early sutras, Vashishta Sutra, Katyayana Sutra, Apastamba Sutra, a number of these sutras, and your Smritis were translated. And your classic among them is the Manusmriti, right? And this becomes your major source of classical Hindu law, which is utilized within the Indian courts, the Supreme Courts then in Calcutta. They also were responsible, remember, see, as I said, colonialism cannot be understood in black and white terms. So there are dark moments within colonialism, and there are revealing moments in colonialism also. So at the same time, there was this huge attempt to also uh, preserve the cultural heritage of India, right? So you had a number of bodies that came up. There's Archaeological Survey of India that came up, which actually went on to protect Indian monuments, archaeological sites across India. You had the discovery of the Harappan civilization in 1922. Yes, so there was this. You had, for example, the decipherment of the Brahmi script, and this happened by a man called James Prinsep, who was the assay master in Banaras and became the president of the Asiatic Society of Kolkata. He deciphered the Brahmi script, began reading the Ashokan inscriptions. In a way, he brings back what was forgotten. He brings back what was forgotten into the present. But in my defense, let me put it this way. This is how it's understood. That let's say Indians forgot their past. And in a way, colonialism brought back memory. That is the core idea of your argument by Cousins here. What he's saying is Indians have forgotten their histories. Indians have forgotten aspects of the past. And in a way, colonialism brought back via modernity and a synthesis of tradition. It brought back many things from the past. Now, one way, as I said, is it's a long history. The long history. The idea of memory operating across that long history would, would differ from period to period, right? So people might not remember at that particular moment in time what has actually happened in the past, either because it might not be culturally relevant for them in the present, right? Remember, Ashoka and Buddhism become very, very important after Princeps discovery of Brahmi. Yes, Ashoka was very important and very well known in India until the 11th century. Very well known. But then you have the decline of Buddhism that's happening by the 11th century in India. So Buddhism actually moves out of India, moves across Southeast Asia, it moves into China, and goes into Far East Asia. So in a way, the idea, what you understand as retrieval and forgetting is a very crucial aspect. So you don't forget, mainly because, but you only, in a way, leave out aspects of your history, mainly because it might not be relevant for you at that particular moment in time. Specifically with nation states which have long civilizational histories, this is what happens. In fact, this reminds me uh, of a wonderful intellectual, an independent intellectual in India. He wrote two books on translation. His name was Sujit Mukherjee. He wrote two books as Translation as Recovery and Translation as Discovery. He worked basically on translation studies. But what's very important with Sujit Mukherjee were these ideas. Yes, that there is a process of discovery and there is a process of recovery. Right? So what happened during the Bengal Renaissance were both these things operating. There was a recovery, and there was also a discovery, where you are where you are engaged with the two. He also talks about aesthetic progress, does it? Where in that book he's going to highlight the literary achievements, the artistic achievements. At the same time, he's going to talk about Bengal as the epicenter of the Renaissance. Right? I told you, I mean, there was this huge output of literature that happened, huge number of poets that came in, right? Poets writing in Bangla, poets writing in English, large number of poets that came in. You had this massive figure of Tagore also coming in. You had this huge interpretation of art that was happening with the Bengal School of Art. You had this huge movement in sciences that was happening in that particular period. Yes? And a huge growth of nationalism also. So aesthetic progress of what Cousins is talking about happened in that period. But the problem with this argument is, now coming to the core, the problem with this argument is if you accept Cousins' ideas of the Renaissance in India, then your problem is it we assume that it was colonialism that changed India, correct? We are going to assume that everything happened, what you understand as modernity, or the growth in sciences, or the growth in aesthetics, actually happened on account of colonialism, right? In a way, in a post-colonial sense, you could question this and ask whether the civilizational attempt was actually successful, because colonialism is seen as a civilizational idea. Was it actually successful? And if you look at Cousin's argument, you would definitely agree. You would definitely agree, yeah, this is what happened, right? This is what happened. And what we are seeing as a modern nation state in development is only because of colonialism. All right, that's the larger argument that Cousins is bringing out, and that's the larger idea that would come out if you read Cousins' thesis, that it was colonialism which actually is responsible for India to come into a civilizational state. All right. Now modern post-colonial studies has done away with this idea in a big way, right? It has done away with it. But what was interesting is the argument that's happening between the two somewhere in 1920s, where we are still talking about an early growth of Indian nationalism in India. 1920s is still a very early period for Indian nationalism, though to some extent, Gandhi is already in. And Aurobindo is contesting it in that reply. And he's writing and he's titling the book the same, The Renaissance in India. Right? And he's going to contest it and say, and he will tell you that that Cousin's argument is not nuanced enough. Cousin's argument is largely deterministic. The moment I say colonialism was responsible for India is a deterministic idea. Then what do I say about 8,000 years of your civilizational history? What was that? How would West Asia look at colonialism? Many of these nation states came out after the Second World War. How does Latin America look at colonialism? These are old civilizational areas. Yes. So would we say that what you understand as modernity influencing cultural practices, modernity influencing your intellectual ambience, modernity influencing your civilizational synthesis or crisis, whatever way you want to look at it. Is it only due to colonialism, or how do we look at the past? Do we see the past as a dark age? Do we see the past as what your larger historiography of India has looked at? Whether it's James Mill with his history of India, large number of figures, right? Who looked at this older civilizational history as nonsense, right? It only required a few uh, enlightened people, uh, and we must thank the Orientalists to some extent for having rescued some of these ideas from these colonialists in a way who actually misinterpreted a lot of what you understand as early India. So Aurobindo is going to question that. And it's nuanced enough. Remember, he's talking about three phases within which three phases within which he would like to look at the Renaissance, the Bengal Renaissance. Three phases within which, and now remember, Bengal Renaissance is now not just Bengal, right? The idea of Renaissance by the time Aurobindo is writing has spread out across India, right? So you have schools, you have universities, educational systems, policies now operative across British India. So this Renaissance, which began in Bengal, will spread out across India. So he's arguing it out within three phases. And he says, what is the first phase? The first phase of the Renaissance, he says, is a reception and an imitation of Western ideas, which happened, which actually happened, right? So you had any number of writers today who were writing within the Romantic tradition in Bengal and so on and so forth. Yes, so you had this. You also had an imitation of Western ideas. There was this interesting interesting book that I was reading where it's actually called The Raj on the Move, right? So most of these British officers were getting transferred continuously, so their whole household would be transferred. Yeah, it happens even today. So in the process, what would happen is the entire household, along with uh, certain traditions, would move. So it's a huge mistake to say colonialism would be just the West, because a large number of people who were within colonialism were born in India and who died in India, right? Who were born or died in South Asia. Let us say. So it's not as if uh, 80% of them actually saw Britain. Britain was only an idea for them. You know, there are a few travelogues. Some of you could read this. It could be Emily Eden's travelogue, right? And Hawkes' travelogue. Both are very different uh, in terms of how India is looked at. Yes, but there was an imitation of sorts. Specifically, as I said, this Raj on the move, and people are moving. You had this idea of a private sphere and a public sphere within your own homes. Yes, and a number of these British administrators were also Indians. Yeah, so it's not just a white man or a colonialist in that way. So many of them had adopted the British style of living. They had their own concepts like a drawing room. They had British furniture within their homes. Yes, and they had a private sphere also where they lived the Indian way. Yes, so you had an imitation of Western ideas. That actually happened where you had a reception. You imitated Western ideas, and if you're talking about aesthetics, writing, and so on and so forth. You had European forms of literature come in, right? Whether whether it's an ode, whether it's a sonnet, a number of these forms that are a part of your romantic tradition did come. Then Aurobindo talks about it, that there was a form of us of, and it's extremely Hegelian. All right, he's talking. Hegel would talk about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So I mean, Aurobindo is also talking about it in a different way. Because not in that classic Hegelian sense here, but he's talking about reaction and selective assimilation, right? So it's not that you receive everything wholesale. So it's a very interesting idea, isn't it? That this unquestioning acceptance of new ideas that Cousins was talking about in his book, The Renaissance of India, is something that's contested, where he says there was a reaction, and there was something called a selective assimilation. Not everything was accepted by the Indian people. They accepted a few things, they rejected a number of things, right? And for this, read the Hind Swaraj, where you'll understand this ideas of how reactive it can be, and where Gandhi also talks about selective assimilation of how colonialism operates. And the third phase where Aurobindo is talking about is in terms of a synthesis. He talks about a new cultural creation. So, can we do away? Aurobindo's argument is, can you do away with colonialism? Can you do away with your colonial history? However destructive it might be, or however creative it might be. Because Aurobindo, like most of the thinkers of this period, were educated in Britain. Yes, they received their classical tripos, where they studied classical language, mathematics, philosophy in European universities. They've seen the best of colonialism in a way, in terms of ideas. Yes, they come back to India and they visualize India, they visualize the past of India, they visualize the history of India, they visualize the cultural amnesias, they visualize spaces across time, the past. And they are they are debating whether people can accept this wholesale, or do we accept the beneficial parts of colonialism and reject the rest? Yeah, and that's what happens. So, where the first phase, where there's a wholesale acceptance of what you saw within late 18th century Bengal, you would see selective assimilation that's happening by 1920s across India. It's not as if everything is accepted. There are certain things that are accepted. For example, education is, but not the interpretation of uh, of India's past. This is something that is challenged right from the time of Tilak and Gokhale. They will be challenging uh, the manner by which history is being interpreted within early India, within the 1920s India, 1905 to 1920s. So there is a selective assimilation. So colonialism would have operate as a blanket fire within the first phase. And by the time the second phase comes in, Aurobindo will talk about it in terms of a selective assimilation. And then you have the third phase where you have a synthesis of ideas. This is where you see people like Aurobindo, people like Ambedkar, people like Gandhi, people like Subhash Chandra Bose. They're all coming in now as people like Lokmanya Tilak. They're all coming in now as this idea of synthesis. Yes, where you're educated within the European models, but at the same time you're integrating European models and the older Indian models together. And in a way, you're bringing about a new cultural creation. You're bringing about a synthesis which is not in the process of conflict. That's the larger idea. Aurobindo is not talking about conflict here. Yes, because that's your larger problem with post-colonial studies. Because post-colonial studies would function on the idea of a binary always. It's black or white, good or bad. Was it conducive? Was it destructive? Whatever. It's always a binary. That's how post-colonial studies would look at it. There are very few post-colonial scholars who would look at it in terms of the idea of synthesis, the idea of a cultural creation. All right, that's why I mentioned Sujit Mukherjee, idea of discovery and the idea of recovery. two things. So you are in the process of discovering your past, and you're also in the process of recovering certain aspects of your past, and in the process you're trying to form and bring about a new cultural synthesis. Am I clear so far?
Yes, sir.
So how does Aurobindo look at this Western influence? What Aurobindo says is it has to be understood as a catalyst and not as a source. You know, it's like when you strike a fire. So when you strike a fire, you need a catalyst. Yes, you need a catalyst, something to begin the fire, but it cannot be the source of fire. So what he is very clear on this. So he says you need to get back, and remember, as I said, Aurobindo represents one of the opinions. Vivekananda earlier would talk about the same thing. Vivekananda comes much early, all right? He still he he is Vivekananda is important for this reason. He is speaking the same things in in Europe and then in America, right? But he's speaking this during the period of what you understand as a Renaissance was taking place, right? It's that early. So it's not as if everybody is blind to what's happening in this period. So they are all understanding that you need the West, you need Western ideas, you need Western modernity, but it cannot swarm your original self. Right? It cannot be the source of your renaissance. It can only be a catalyst. Right? So, in a way, what he's doing is he's critiquing a blind idea of westernization, and he's also critiquing revivalism in a big way. Aurobindo's ideas of reviving the past would be very different from your 20th century, 21st century naturalisms. Revivalism for him is not just a political idea. That's because he's talking about it in terms of the spirit also. Like somewhere like Gandhi did, where he talked about the idea of Swaraj, not just in terms of freedom, but he's also talking about it in terms of how the human self is going to evolve into a better human being. So, in a way, revivalism for him is not just a material idea of the past or a material idea of bringing back aspects of the past. All right? For Aurobindo, the idea of retrieval, the idea of rediscovery, and the idea of recovery. All right? I'm keeping with those two terms. Love those two terms, discovery and recovery. Keeping with these two terms, he says you need to bring it back with the notion of the Indian spirit. All right. So we are talking about this long history of India. We're talking about, as I said, huge moments of epiphany that happened. All right. Huge achievements that happened, dark periods that happened, and a synthesis of the two to bring about this idea of what you understand as the Indian spirit. This is what Aurobindo would take a stand in terms of how Western influence needs to be contested. It's not just a black and white. That's the limitation of post-colonial studies. Actually. So you're just denying what happened, right? A better way within post-colonial studies would be to come into the state where you can have a synthesis happening. Yes. So there's a complete acceptance of a certain period. There's also a realization that something good has happened. Bring in some form of synthesis and try to recreate that notion of Indian spirit, because the Indian spirit is an inclusive spirit. Correct. So when you go back 10,000 years in the Indian historical period or its proto-history, you would find that a huge number of people, huge number of cultures have come to India. In the process, there's been huge change, cultural change, huge changes within society, Indian society, huge changes within the Indian intellectual spirit. Number of things have happened. All right, and 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 there's been a synthesis across. So if you look at the Indian traditions, you would find that Buddhism would never be against this idea of Brahmanism, or Brahmanism would not be against the idea of Buddhism. But the moment when I look at the early structures, the moment I come to structures beyond 8th century, 10th century, then I find a difference. So you have a lot of contestation, you have a lot of synthesis, you have a lot of where you rediscover aspects of your past, you try to recover aspects of your past, and this has been a continuous process within the last 10,000 years, of what I understand as the Indian presence. Right from your early settlements in Mehrangarh, in Kotiji, early settlements in Kalibangan, Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, right? Lothal, all what you would term as your early Indian proto-history. You have had this notion of synthesis happening. Early years of Mauryans, the Gupta period that comes in later, the tribal kingdoms that come in later, huge amount of synthesis that's happening, right? Where you're talking about this encounter with the past, a careful rediscovery of the past, a careful retrieval of the past, and a careful synthesis with the present. That's what has been happening. When you say the Indian spirit, this is what we talk about. All right? It's a long civilizational history. So when he critiques Cousins and he brings back his model on the Renaissance, he's going to focus on your Western influence as overshadowing your long old histories. You're going to ignore spirituality as a core driver. Remember, we need to distinguish between spirituality and religion. All right? Both are two different concepts. India has been, or South Asia has been completely driven by different religions. But a spirituality, looking at spirituality is a different idea. All right? Spirituality would not look at the notion of different religions in total, actually. Yeah, spirituality would be all encompassive. It would mean the cessation of the self. At the same time, there would be a recognition of birth, rebirth, and the idea of death. All right. So what you understand is the nature of time. Right. This would be this is something that's core within all your old civilizations, and this needs to be a core driver. All right. And the next thing he says is this European ethnology that Cousins brings out is absolutely inadequate because he says it appears very prescriptive for Aurobindo. And by bringing out his three phases, the three phases I was talking about, where am I? Yeah. Bringing about these three phases, Aurobindo brings out a model around which around which colonialism can be understood. Here, you don't have the binary ideas that you have within modern post-colonial studies. What you have here is the phase three. You have this idea of synthesis and you have this idea of cultural creation. That is something very, very important. Yes? So, if I look at the key differences where Aurobindo is arguing this period is the global mission and the spiritual essence within India. Two things, because it's only a spiritual idea that can go global. All right? People make a mistake and they think religions go global. Religions don't go global. Religions come and they go after a certain period of time. It's the spirit that remains, that continues. So he's going to argue on this. Cousins is going to be slightly limited, where he is, where in a very, I won't say he's limited in terms of in terms of his intellectuality. No, the fact that he's speaking within a colonialist platform is where his argument is ending, where he talks about it in terms of only an aesthetic revival, only talking about a West-inspired uh, renaissance that happened in South Asia. Right? But if you look at it in terms of scope, you'll find Aurobindo's critique is much broader, right? Because he's not only talking about reception and imitation. He admits that it's happening. He's also talking about it in terms of reaction. He's also talking about the selective assimilation of ideas. At the same time, he's also talking about a very important idea where he's talking about synthesis and a new cultural creation. Yes? So if I talk about his global vision as to how these ideas can move, we need to understand this renaissance and this period. We need to understand this in global spiritual terms, right? Because a number of things that happened within the Bengal Renaissance, remember, happened across many colonized nations. It's not that it just happened here. But what you saw within India, you might not find it in Latin America, or you might not find it in Africa, right? But what you have within South Asia and India, you would find that it moved the whole range. Right? So when you say how modernity and colonialism functions across time and across civilizations and across colonized spaces, you'll find that within India, it moved the whole range. It moved within your personal self, it moved within education, it moved within arts, it moved within the sciences, it moved within your larger social sphere, it affected your public sphere, it affected your private sphere, number of things. All right, it moved the whole range. Though it moved the whole range, it's not as if people swallowed it whole and soul. There was a contestation in places, there was a selective assimilation in places, there was a synthesis of some form also. But there's also a recognition of, of the spiritual understanding that has kept India in the long Indian history together, all right? And that was seen as something that could be posited against Western materialism that came in, because spirituality would not be material. So you'd understand the transient nature of things. Materialism is linear in terms of space and linear in terms of time. Yes, but as I said, India and these older civilizational states think in cyclic terms. You think in terms of birth, you think in terms of development, and you think in terms of death. It's a constant cycle, all right? So it's a cyclic idea of time and a cyclic idea of materialism that's constantly functioning. And of course, the third one, when he talks about the life divine, that is your late Aurobindo, of course. That's a very late Aurobindo because, as I said, there are many phases to Aurobindo when he's developing as a thinker. And the later Aurobindo is going to talk about the life divine. So, should I stop here for today and wait for questions?
Yes, sir. Certainly, sir. Certainly. So now it will be open to questions. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful exposition of the whole background in which the modern literary theory actually emerges in India, what we call contemporary Indian literary theories. So now, questions, comments, please be brief, and we can add. We have many students who would be inquisitive about it. So Shivadi has raised. Yes, go ahead, Shivadi, please.
Namaste, sir.
Namaskar.
Sir, I had two questions, but because sir asked me to be brief, so I will ask you the second question.
Yeah.
And I will try to combine the two, let's say. Sri Aurobindo developed, or at least argued for this symbolic hermeneutical positioning with regards to the Vedic Sahitya, right?
Mm.
How do we look at it in terms of the critique of cuisine on the one hand and the idea of synthesis on the other? Because there were other hermeneutical ideas coming in India, developed in India, like say for Dayanand Saraswati and all these people. And the second is how did how do we look at in terms of the idea of human, the whole Renaissance and critique of Renaissance? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. See, as I said, there were many critical positions that were taken during this Renaissance period, right? So Dayanand Saraswati, you had people who moved back to the past. So you had Dayanand Saraswati, in a way, going back to the Vedic and is bringing about the Arya Samaj. All right, you had this larger monotheistic idea within that's coming in through uh, Islam as well as through Christianity. It's affecting the Brahmo Samaj in a big way. So this monotheistic idea on one hand, all right. I'm talking about the immediate colonialism because the monotheistic idea is already present within the Upanishads, remember, all right? It's already there within the Upanishads. So it's a the Brahmo Samaj becomes a synthesis of everything when he's bringing it in. Keshav Chandra Sen brings it in. But when it comes to, as I said, different positions, different thinkers, in a way, that's why I use those two terms. No, I talked about Sujit Mukherjee's ideas of discovery and recovery. Two beautiful terms, right? They should be used in a bigger way, actually. So each of these thinkers are discovering something new and they're recovering something new. But what they're discovering is within the source ideas, isn't it? Would you agree with me?
Yes, somewhere, yes, yes. It's already
It-
present.
It's already present. But when it comes to that superhuman, it's interesting because remember, Aurobindo is also bringing about this idea of integral yoga, isn't he? Right? He's talking about the idea of the Kundalini. He's talking about Kundalini Shastra in a big way. He's talking about chakra meditations in a big way. He's talking about an evolution of the self. He's talking about the evolution of the mind in a very big way. And mostly, he's talking about that transformative force that happens within you. So the nature of the Superman is something, and I'm sure Aurobindo was also extremely close to Nietzsche in a big way. But Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, all right, the idea of Nietzschean Superman is very, very different from what Aurobindo is talking about. Your Superman with Aurobindo would be something like in the Gita where Arjuna asks, like, who is a yogi, right? And Krishna replies, what does he reply? He says, a man who sleeps while the world is awake and who is awake while the world is sleeping. Yes?
Yes, sir.
So, a person in a state of complete awareness, that is your idea of the Superman. Because the tragedy of humankind is we are lost in either the past or the liminal future. We are not looking at the idea of the present at all. And a person who is able to visualize the present in a better way, because these are ideas of the later Aurobindo, remember? Aurobindo, when the Renaissance in India is being written, is not your Rishi at that time. He's still a revolutionary. It's only when he moves to Pondicherry, finishes his revolutionary activities, establishes Aurobindo, then he starts exploring the yogic systems in India. Right? That's where he talks about Superman. So, Superman would be this: a person in control of himself to a large extent. Something what Gandhi would talk about in terms of Swaraj. Yeah, are you getting
Okay,
me?
sir. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
Thank Thank you, sir. That's it.
Most welcome. Yes.
So, others, any questions from anyone? Aman, Raj, Ansh, you always have questions. Joel, Mandira, today one brilliant student is not here, Laura.
Oh,
There are two people I think they are, I don't know, they're unexpectedly missing. That's all right.
I think you could just order these books. I'm sure they're there in your library.
Yeah, yeah. There is a
Yeah.
library.
Yeah.
We will order the books, and also if they are available online, we will download immediately.
No, what I'll do is I'll try and send you some of the ebooks that I have on
Sure,
Aurobindo.
sure,
Yeah.
sir, sure.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question, but this maybe not that much interest. This, but what is the different meaning between? It's actually it's not meaning. What is the difference between Europe Renaissance and Indian Renaissance in the context of how to say like tradition and cultural or literatures?
Yeah. No. Actually, there should be no comparison between the two, right? Now, what you had in Europe was a very organic idea. So when you talk about Renaissance, or what you understand it as rebirth or a new awakening, we're talking about it in organic terms. Or when I say organic, there has to be a certain socio-political materialist idea that gives birth to new ideas, new things. Yes, that actually happened in Europe, right? The fall of Constantinople, or the fall of the Holy Roman Byzantine Empire, the coming of the printing press, right? You had new materials within which art could be explored. So your Da Vinci's and Michelangelo's would not have happened if chemistry had not evolved. So they had new pigments that led to a growth in paintings, led to developments in terms of architecture and so on and so forth. Right? So it was an organic idea that came about because of war. It came about because of contestations. It came about because of a protest between nation states at that particular period. All that happened. For example, Da Vinci was exiled. Dante was exiled. Right? So many of them have been not only contesting the problems, at the same time they're also creating. So it was an organic movement that happened. It was as if that culturally and materially there was a fertile field around which things could happen. That happened during the European Renaissance. Yes, but the same is understood as something that happened within India. It was not an organic idea. That is the difference. It was not something uh, that Indian society, Indian materiality, or changes in Indian politics or Indian sociology actually brought up. There was no, there was no, there were no conditions within which what you understand as a Europe as the European Renaissance could have come about. It only came about because of colonialism, colonialist policies, imperialism, establishment of certain codes, the establishment of the law, and so on and so forth. So, on account of this, you need to make a change within society. So, what you have during this period is they began this with a huge intervention into education in a big way. So, if I bring about a very clear distinction between the two, I would say Europe was extremely organic in terms of its development. India was not an organic idea, mostly an imposed idea that came in. It brought about a lot of good, let me tell you. One must not negate colonialism completely, right? There were a number of good things that happened with Indian colonialism, and number of dark things that happened also. So your Renaissance, the number of positive things that happened with it also, all right? So you had language, you had sciences coming in, number of things happened, which were extremely good, which even Aurobindo would admit, right? He says, yes, there was imitation, yes, but that's not where it ends, no? That's not where it ends. So you need to bring about some resolution within yourself as to how would you look at your past. Yes, we, we cannot be in conflict with the past all the time. We cannot be in conflict with ourselves all the time. We cannot be in conflict with the received traditions all the time. Somewhere we need to confront it, we need to contest it, but at the same time one needs to grow a bit more. One has to come into some form of a peaceful understanding with the past to bring about some notions of synthesis. So you need to somewhere synthesize your basic ideas within India, or whichever nation state we're talking about in South Asia. You need to go back to your past, bring about and bring in a certain form of synthesis with your present. In the process, you will have a more peaceful life, isn't it? Are you getting me? It's not organic. That is the problem. Did I make myself clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
So anybody else, any questions? Okay. So I think then we should stop. Uh, so for today, we thank you, sir.
Most welcome, sir.
We
Yeah.
will meet tomorrow again, sir.
Yes,
Same
sir.
time.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
little different. It is a great pleasure to hear you.
yeah.
Of course, you have covered a large gamut in the background, which is very important and crucial to understand. And last question, because we have students from ASEAN countries, and this is a very, again, important question.
Mm.
What do we mean by Renaissance? Because the same word is being used by different people in different contexts.
Yes.
And especially in the context of India nowadays, some people have debated also that whether the word Renaissance should be used or not. So there are many aspects of it. Of course, in one lecture we cannot discuss everything. But the question itself shows that we have been able to rake up the mind of our scholars and
That's very important. Very important. Yes.
thinking on it. So that is a promising aspect. So
Yes.
we are grateful to you, sir.
Most welcome, sir. We'll meet
Thank you.
again tomorrow, 10
Yes,
o'clock.
thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Most welcome.
Thank
Can I log off?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Welcome, sir. Thank you.